Hello there guys and welcome back to another brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast. I hope that you guys are well, and just like that, the Mexican Grand Prix has been concluded, and whilst of course it's certainly not going to go down in the F1 archives as a classic, it was another example, in a word, of the pure dominance of Red Bull and Max Verstappen after taking his 14th win of the season, an incredible number, breaking the outright record once held by Michael Schumacher and Sebastian Vettel for the most wins in a Grand Prix season. And joining me on this episode, as always, we have Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington. Now, lads, I think dominance is probably the right word, but how can we sum up the Mexican Grand Prix? If we can try and put a positive spin on it, perhaps.
There was hope at the beginning. Mercedes are obviously, keeping Max honest, and then it looks like after the first set of pit stops, the same old continued. And I'd just like to add on something we were talking about before we went on air. Just a message to Mercedes and Ferrari, for whatever reason you're listening to our small, humble podcast. Please get your shit together next season because we are bored. We are bored. We want some entertainment next season. Don't take too much away from Max Verstappen because, at the end of the day, guy's just driving what he's got in front of him. But my God, we need some entertainment at the front because the season promised a hell of a lot. It looked like Ferrari were going to give Red Bull a challenge, and it all fell apart. And particularly to Mercedes, because I still don't trust Ferrari to do a job over the course of a season. This sport needs Mercedes to be back on it because, as I said, the season promised a lot, and it really has been an anticlimax. So here's to some change in 2023. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, it gets to that point in the season when both championships are now all wrapped up and you're looking for battles all across the pecking order right now. And of course, there are plenty. There's the battle at McLaren and Alpine. Of course, there's a battle between Ferrari and Mercedes, although really that still requires quite a leap from where we are right now to get a real battle between those two. Mercedes will certainly do their best. We'll have to wait and see. There's battles with Alfa Romeo and Aston Martin. I guess what I'm saying, guys, is that there are battles up and down the field right now. But in terms of the stories from the Mexican Grand Prix, you really kind of have to dig deep down the pecking order to find real moments of brilliance and real highlights. There wasn't really much to sort of draw back on. I mean, look, we get races.
Daniel Ricciardo is back. That's it.
Well, we saw the good and the bad of Daniel Ricciardo this weekend, didn't we? And his performance overall, I suppose you could look at the positives from it, but I don't know. I think people were sort of quite easy to forget what he'd done to wreck someone else's race in the process. And for me,
boom, boom, smash, smash, win, win, so to speak, isn't it?
Well, it wasn't George Russell this weekend. That's all we can say. George kept his nose clean and did the best job that he could. But I suppose, how can I put this in the right way? I think, as Courtney mentioned, you mentioned it really, really well, Courtney. We were kind of hoping for a lot. And we know in the past, Mexico is a circuit that, despite the incredible fanfare and the incredible support and the atmosphere and the buzz around it that we often get, last season was also not that exciting in terms of a Grand Prix. We got all the action at the first corner where Max Verstappen got ahead of his rivals at the beginning of the race and obviously just ran away with it from there. This time around, we kind of hoped for something similar. Never really happened. And then it was a race-long battle of strategy, hoping to see who can keep their tyres going the longest, which strategy was going to come out on tops. And I think we got to the point around about lap 31 or so where Mercedes started to realise that Red Bull were going to go all the way to the end on their current strategy and they'd got it horribly wrong. And it just kind of left everyone with that sort of sensation of, great. We were kind of hoping that this would envelop into something good, and it looks like this is what we're going to get for the rest of the Grand Prix. And ultimately, that's what we did, really. And I suppose all you can say is Red Bull were just absolutely brilliant, really. There was just no answer from Mercedes to what Red Bull could do today.
Yeah, I think this race summed up the season in general. Promised so much and just become a massive anticlimax. But look, 2 more races, get this season out of the way, and here's to 2023 because I'm fully done with 2022. I'm kind of obliged to watch it right now because we do a podcast. But yeah, further down the grid is where the excitement lies, I guess.
Well, I mean, it certainly does help that you watch the races, Courtney. I mean, we try to blag it as best as we can and pretend that we actually know what we're talking about. It gets increasingly more difficult when you don't actually watch the races. You know, you have to.
I don't think we have to at this point. We go, yeah, Max Verstappen won. I could not watch the race. Max won, didn't he?
Yeah, well, this has been the story of the season. I mean, we often have, I think throughout this season, there have been some caveats to Red Bull's dominance in that it's not just been about Red Bull being brilliant and Max Verstappen equally being brilliant and driving to the level and ability that we all were afraid that Max would eventually reach. We just never thought it would happen so soon. And now that it is happening, it's quite scaring and frightening in the same way as it was for Sir Lewis Hamilton when he also reached those dizzying heights and form and purple patches and everything that comes with that. It just, for me, I think we're at this point now when we look back on this season, we look at the figures, we see 14 wins right now, could easily be 16 by the end of the season. Add another 2 for Sergio Perez as well, his teammate. 1-2 in the championship, winning the championship by not only the largest margin, but also having the record for the most points in the season, which I believe Max now has already, let alone what Red Bull are going to have by the end of the season. You can't really argue the case that Red Bull overall have not only done the best job, but they have got by far one of the most dominant cars we've ever seen in the sport now.
If Max wins the next 2 races, I believe he will be the most dominant driver car pairing in the sports history.
Yeah, and then that doesn't surprise me.
Race wins.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because this is not to take anything away from what Max has done, because what I think the point that I'm trying to make here to kind of hammer this down is we see this argument of if Ferrari hadn't messed up in the way that they had with strategy and reliability troubles and the driver errors, of course, from Leclerc and Sainz equally, where would they still be in this picture? I think they'd be a lot closer, but I still think the result seems inevitable at this point, that if nothing else changed other than what happened early on in the season, Red Bull and Max Verstappen, if they hadn't won already, they'd be well on their way to doing it.
Yeah, I think that again, something else we discussed before we came on, I think that technical directive was the killer. You know, Toto Wolff was keen to slow down both Ferrari and Red Bull, but in the process, he only slowed down one team with retrospect. So you kind of have to blame Toto Wolff for this.
So yeah, that's what we're saying, guys. Basically, if you want to blame any, no, if you want to blame anyone for Red Bull's dominance this year, just blame Toto Wolff. That's what we're saying.
I was going to say one thing that do want to add, Adam, is with the form that Red Bull and Max have done. It's obviously the brilliant job of what they've obviously have achieved as a team and working in harmony, regardless of the state of the competition has been. And they're just obviously the pinnacle that they've achieved together, and you can't take that away from how they've operated compared to where the competitors just falling along the way through the season, regardless of calls. If it's a team or a driver issue or a strategy issue, be it Mercedes today, it's just obviously you can't take away the effort that they've done in that matter.
No, absolutely. I think we have to praise Red Bull, quite emphatically. Obviously we'll talk a little bit about the cost cap thing later on because that is quite relevant, but I think we have to acknowledge the job that Red Bull have done this season. And despite the difficult start that they had, and that Max had started the season with a couple of retirements, and it did look like they were on the back foot, the way that they have responded and the way that they've gone on from that, probably since the French Grand Prix, I think probably was the real turning point. They have been absolutely formidable to a degree that we've never seen dominance quite like this, and we can only praise them for that. Unfortunately, it's just left us in a position right now where we kind of are clutching at straws, kind of hoping for some level of excitement, and owing to how brilliant Red Bull are, it's really over in a flash almost. It almost feels inevitable, really. I feel like there's a Thanos inevitability meme to come with that, with Max Verstappen at the helm of it, and that's all you can really say. But it is just a real hallmark to how well he's been driving this year, how well Red Bull have performed this year, and the job that they've done collectively. I mean, the word of the day has to be tyre management, and on strategy, Mercedes looked like this was something that were going to get them. I mean, at the start of the race, guys, did you feel that when both Red Bull and Mercedes went opposite ways on strategy, with Red Bull starting on the softs, looking like they were going to two-stop, Mercedes trying to do the one-stop on medium hards, it did feel like Mercedes were going to be in a position where they may be in track position in the final stint, or be in a position where they might be able to hunt Red Bull down themselves. What ultimately went wrong for them today?
Yeah, I originally thought that Red Bull went for the softs, thinking that they wanted to survive, obviously, the beginning of the race, because there's that long run to turn one. So I think I thought Red Bull were able to try and get Max and Sergio 1-2 after turn one and try to control the race from there. It didn't quite turn out that way. So I thought, you know what? Lewis and George do a decent job on the medium tyres. They're staying close to Max, despite the fact he's on the faster tyre. It's advantage Mercedes. And then after the pit stops, I was dubious on the very start. I was like, went on the hards, because we heard them saying throughout the weekend the hard is obviously the most durable, but it's a slower tyre. So when I saw Mercedes bolt on the hard tyres, I was like, this is where things could go wrong here, because we're seeing throughout the years that Mercedes have been, they've always turned to the hard tyres, they've always gone for the longer strategy, and as obviously historically worked to their favour. But no one barely did any running on the hard tyres. People don't want to go near them this weekend, so I was shocked to see Mercedes go onto the hard tyres, and it proved to be a massive mistake. I'm not saying that Mercedes would have won, but it could have given us the grandstand finish. That's almost what we got in Austin. And I suppose what we can take from it moving forward is that Mercedes are edging closer. Yes, they were so far behind in the constructors and in the drivers' championships, but given how far away they were at the beginning of the season compared to where they are now, it does give you some sense of optimism that, particularly with the extra wind tunnel time they're going to get over the winter break, it just gives you some kind of hope that Mercedes will be there to give Red Bull a challenge. Because I know there'll be people will be saying, oh, he's only saying that because he supports Lewis Hamilton. But I was all for the challenge that Ferrari were offering Red Bull despite Mercedes' struggles. If your team isn't doing well, or your favourite driver or team are doing well, you want to be seeing a show. I don't care who wins. If it's not your favourite driver or team, I don't care who wins. It's the same with football. I'm a West Ham fan. It doesn't bother me if Man City or Liverpool win. Or, shall we say, this season Arsenal. Adam, can't forget about Arsenal. But as a neutral, I want to be seeing that go to the very end of the season, because if it's not your team involved, you want to be entertained. It's like second-hand entertainment, isn't it? So you want to be seeing those battles. You want to be seeing sort of like the moments and memories you can talk about for years to come. And it makes our job a hell of a lot more enjoyable doing a podcast. So next season, please, we need Mercedes back in the mix, because Adam, I know you love Ferrari, but it's still proven to me they can't maintain a challenge over the course of a season. And I just feel that if neutrals had a choice between Mercedes and Ferrari challenging Red Bull and Max.
Yeah, no, that is very, very true. And just guys, obviously, if you're listening to this and watching this on YouTube, apologies for the internet connection issue. I know that might be affecting the quality of the podcast. Hopefully they'll get sorted sooner rather than later. Just to let you know, we are aware of this and it is affecting it, so we can only apologise for that for the time being. Just a few teething problems we need to iron out for future episodes. Lee, it does feel at the moment, as Courtney's obviously mentioned, that it was rather anticlimactic in this race. It did seem to be a pivotal moment at the point where Mercedes were changing their strategy a little bit. It looked like originally that their pace looked pretty good on the mediums. They were keeping Red Bull honest. Red Bull were trying to stretch out these soft tyres for as long as possible. It did feel like there was a point in that race where if Mercedes could keep the performance up and make the tyres go long, they might be able to hunt Red Bull down towards the end of the Grand Prix. As it were, they both decided to change on strategy for both drivers. Instead of going long and putting on the softs, they went for the harder tyres around about lap 31, 33, I think, for Hamilton and Russell respectively. In your opinion, what changed for Mercedes to alter their strategy, and do you feel that that was the wrong decision from them?
Well, I think, as proven by Daniel's performance towards the end, with on the soft slate, it was the wrong decision to go to the hard, spin the slower tyre, and how Daniel carved through the field after he had those softs put on. I'm not talking about McLaren. I'm just talking about the tyre strategy, just to to make it clear to the viewers here. Is they put on the soft tyres and he carved through the field. Obviously, Lando let him pass because he was asked to by McLaren, but then he made up a 10-second penalty over Ocon to keep 7th. And that was in a McLaren, and Daniel, who has not been driving at the best that we know or believe we can drive at this season. So in a Mercedes of George and Lewis, that could have been quite a exciting end, even if it didn't become to fruition. It was still given a more climatic end to watch. Going, oh, can they do it? Can they get? Oh, they've fallen short. Oh, they've done it. Well, it's something to be entertaining, as Courtney was saying. But the reason why they did it, I think they really believed Red Bull was going to do a two stop, and they, for copying them on the strategy, being a 2-stop is not going to work, so we need to do a 1-stop. Admittedly, I don't know if Lewis or George were complaining about the tyres, but maybe Mercedes saw something on their sensors that the tyres were going and they needed to more durable tyre than the hard, and the softs wouldn't last the 40 laps. That obviously Daniel did. I think Daniel did 42 laps on those softs.
Yeah, and I think Vettel
so they obviously made the decision. I'm surprised that they didn't split their strategy, because you think, you're chasing, you want to make it the competitor be unpredictable, but if you put them both on, you put yourself into a corner and you don't have any variation. And George is moaning for the entire of the race that I want to change my tyres, I want to change my tyres. Lewis wasn't happy, but Mercedes like, no, Red Bull going to pit again, Red Bull good at tyres. No, it didn't. The computer can only say so much, but obviously doesn't take into consideration what the actual team's going to do, and they were very slow to react to the tyres are coming, they're coming in. I think the key for Mercedes not taking it is they just didn't react. Toto is going to be, we're going to be aggressive, we're going to take them to the race win, but they weren't aggressive. They were just slow and just followed their computer simulation of what they thought was in the win, and they didn't actually react to what was happening on track.
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, you're only privy to your own data, really, or anything that other teams give away on the team radio. Unfortunately for Mercedes, they seem quite adamant that those mediums were eventually going to wear out, whether they were judging that by how their own tyres were performing or based on their prediction of what Pirelli had told them over the course of the weekend, or something that they'd seen in free practice, which didn't reflect during the race. I mean, we see this a lot with Mexico, don't we? We see strategies drawn up for the race, and then more often than not, the track tends to be better on the tyres as the weekend progresses, so that you get races where 2-stop strategies seem to be the norm. They very quickly become a 1-stop. It felt to me that ultimately is what cost Mercedes today, and I don't really feel that without a safety car or something like that, I don't really see a scenario where Mercedes were going to get Red Bull today, purely and simply because Red Bull were just able to make those tyres last. I think they gambled on the one strategy that could have worked. I don't believe, with the benefit of hindsight, that if Mercedes had gone long into this race and put the softs on like Ricciardo did towards the end, I don't think that would have been enough. I think Red Bull would have been more than a pit stop ahead of them anyway. They would have caught up Mercedes, probably overtaken the pair of them because they were struggling to make those tyres last as long as they did. I mean, let's be honest, they were saying around lap 50 or 45 or something like that. I mean, Max and Perez were only doing like 43, 44 laps anyway on those medium tyres. As you mentioned, Daniel Ricciardo did, 42 laps, and it was just a balancing act today, and I think ultimately Red Bull got it right. I mean, if you want to, how can I describe this? I think if you look at what happened with Aston Martin today, we had both their drivers running separate races of their own. Stroll trying to run the medium tyres, absolutely using them up like crazy, had to pit early to change them. Vettel, on the other hand, running the soft tyres, going twice as long as Stroll did, made that work for him, although ultimately wasn't successful, but was doing a lot better than his teammate was. So, I don't know, it just felt for me that Mercedes were trying, but ultimately as the race went on, it was becoming more and more out of their control of what they could try and do to win this race. And I think they were just backed into a corner where they just had to try something different, and ultimately it didn't work.
I just get the feeling that the straight line advantage that Red Bull have had, particularly the deployment they have towards the end of the straight, I think that's definitely in Mercedes' head when it comes to decided strategy. because obviously if Mercedes were to even, try the one stop and Red Bull go on a two stop, if say, for example, Lewis is ahead and Max is chasing like we saw in Texas, because of that straight line speed advantage, the Mercedes has been surprisingly slow on the straights. We always associate Mercedes with being the quickest car on the straights. It's been quite the opposite from this season. That is another, obviously that's a big advantage for Red Bull. So I think Mercedes were reluctant to go on to a strategy where Max would be chasing them on the soft tyres, because they saw how that worked out last weekend. So there is a sense where the straight line advantage of Red Bull does limit what Mercedes can do.
Yeah, it does seem that way. And that has been a huge strength for Red Bull this season. I think people often underestimate how important it is to have a car that's so good in the straight line. I mean, Red Bull in the past have gone from a team where they're usually the slowest in the speed traps to now being the fastest. And I think what we've seen in this current era of car, that straight line speed is practically almost everything. I mean, you look at Ferrari, for example, usually one of the best cars in the corners or one of the best cars under braking, but because it's not as good in the straights, they often have to sacrifice performance to compensate for that. No matter how much performance they seem to gain in their engine capacity, they just can't seem to have that balance that Red Bull do, and it's proven to be quite the asset for them. In your minds, guys, moving forward and looking ahead to the next few Grand Prix, we've got Brazil coming up, and we've got Abu Dhabi, the finale for this season. We all kind of felt that this was going to be Mercedes' best opportunity to win a Grand Prix this season. Ultimately, they came up woefully short. Does that mean now in your minds that perhaps Mercedes may have to look at this season potentially as a winless one?
I think the only scenario that could save Mercedes is if we have a wet race at Interlagos. We've had a lot of famous wet races there. So if you have a scenario where there's safety cars galore and, the typical chaos that you usually see at Interlagos, that might be a chance for them. But yeah, I do feel that despite the Red Bull performers' advantage, it was probably the best opportunity of the season lost for Mercedes. I think they'll probably be feeling the way that I've been sort of talking. It says they'll be ready to get this season out of the way. Unlucky 13th for the W13. Get it out of the way and hope to come back stronger next season, because a lot has gone on in the last year or so that's probably hurt Mercedes a lot, and I think it'll mean a hell of a lot to them. Despite the dominance in recent seasons, it'll mean a hell of a lot for them to bounce back and even challenge Red Bull. Because I do think I'm not sort of feeding the narrative of the toxicity that you see online, but after everything that happened last season, they will be particularly keen to get one back on Red Bull. So I think they're going to be driven more than ever to turn things around next season.
Lee, what about you? Mercedes squandered their best chance to win a Grand Prix this season?
I agree with this point that it raining at Interlagos. I mean, it's very good at being wet in Interlagos, but unfortunately, I don't. Based on what we've seen this season, Mercedes haven't been that great in the wet this year, so they would need a lot of safety cars and just messing up the strategy to really put Red Bull on the back foot, even in a wet race. So I do think that's it. That's barring a miracle for Mercedes. That's a win the season. Obviously, the end of Lewis Hamilton's record, which is obviously, believe he's is it the longest, or is he tied?
This is currently the longest win drought he's had in his entire career.
Sorry, I meant the obviously winning a race every season.
Yeah, well, this is it. That is under threat right now.
That record is probably it's going to be stopped there. He's not going to obviously extend it. There obviously, if he stayed in the sport for another 14 odd years, he would be the only driver to win, because he still have that gap year. Not that I expecting the race for 14 years, but based on his obviously I can't remember off the top of my head how many years.
Fernando Alonso's probably still going to be around in 14 years. Probably bank on that.
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure he would love to.
He's like
I know why Fernando Alonso. I do know why Fernando Alonso's career is stretched out for as long as it is, because where mentally he's still stuck in 2017, in 2007. So his mind's told his own body that he's still 15 years younger. So I think that's Fernando Alonso's secret to stretching out his career. His mind is still stuck in 2007.
It's probably not a bad year for him, all things considered, compared to where it is now. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's a tough one for Mercedes to take. But, I mean, you have to look at some of the positives. You know, some of the performances that they've put in this season have been exemplary. Ultimately, what it comes down to is just not having a car that's been capable of winning Grand Prix and World Championships this season. And that's a rarity for them. But ultimately, it's a lesson that they've had to take on the chin. They are making tangible improvements. You know, there are races where they're clearly better than Ferrari, and they have been able to challenge Red Bull. But Red Bull, and particularly Max Verstappen, have been that constant that has always seemed to be the final obstacle that, for whatever reason, they just can't seem to overcome right now. It's just one of those.
I do want to add for next season that the fact that Mercedes are aware of the error they made with this year's car. I believe Toto says they in their when they designed the car, they designed it to be run close to the ground. And obviously, that was great in theory, but you can't actually do it in practice. So that's the mistake they made. So the fact that they've identified that issue means they know potentially what to do to fix it next year. Be it how far they're behind, be behind Red Bull. It's a different question. I'm not saying they'll fix it and all of a sudden all over the back of Red Bull, but they know what they've done wrong. And that obviously bodes well for potentially a more exciting season with Ferrari and Mercedes closing the gap to Red Bull.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good point, and I completely agree with you on that one. Let's talk about Ferrari. And, well, it's a really strange one, isn't it? Because unless you actually looked at the timing screens to see where they are, and the occasional moment from the broadcasting director to pan back to them to see what they were doing, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Ferrari weren't in the race today. They literally were in a glorified test session. As it were, they finished 5th and 6th with Carlos Sainz beating his teammate Charles Leclerc, who arguably, you know, was much quicker than Leclerc all weekend long. And, you know, people are wondering where was this pace gone from Ferrari. They've always been up there, even in qualifying. They've never been this far off pole position this weekend, all season long. And there were a lot of issues for Ferrari. You know, there was, because of the high altitude, they had to run the engine on a lower power mode, apparently, because the turbo just wasn't able to do the work it needed to. So they had to look at reliability just to get the cars to the finish. To compensate that, they had to try and run a low downforce setup on a track which needs a lot of downforce on to manage the tyres properly, which caused the cars to slide around a lot, which not only means it's going to have less grip, but it's also going to make it more difficult to drive, and it's also going to create more wear on the tyres. So Ferrari literally were in a case of just managing their entire race, and probably did the absolute maximum that they could today, and that was come 5th and 6th and hope that something happened ahead of them. So it's a bit of a hit on the Constructors' Championship for them. They've lost 13 points to Mercedes today, so that brings the gap down to 40 with 2 Grand Prix and a sprint race left to go. So Mercedes are now in that one race window of getting Ferrari for P2. It's still getting a little bit closer. I mean, it just kind of sums up Ferrari this season. I mean, perhaps they looked at this race knowing what they knew earlier in the season, thinking that this was potentially going to be a difficult one for them. But, man, I'd never thought this season, the way it was going at the start, that Ferrari were going to find themselves in a glorified test session, really, because they were nowhere this weekend.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on head there, Adam. It's obvious that they had to turn the engine down for it to work properly. We've seen it even going back to when Mercedes dominated. They're always pulled back in Mexico because of the altitude. So that's always been an issue. And I suppose you're right. I imagine Ferrari would have known this. They would have planned ahead with this. You'd like to think they would have anyway, that this would have always have been a difficult weekend for them. But yeah, it's interesting where Ferrari are now. And it also raises a question when it comes to where F1 teams go with their mindset with these new set of rules, because you've got this whole debate now of like, do Ferrari want to finish second, or do they want to finish behind Mercedes and get more wind tunnel time in order to catch up with Red Bull? Because that's what I'm thinking with, like, from the Mercedes perspective. Yeah, it's nice that they're catching up with Ferrari, you know, but do they want to really finish ahead of them in the constructors? So it'd be interesting to know the mindset from Ferrari. I'm sure they'd like to finish second, but I think the fact that they were going into the season hoping to win the championship, I think it'd be more of a case of saving face by finishing second more than anything else.
It is a strange one, isn't it? And knowing what we now know following the cost cap punishment that Red Bull have received, any extra wind tunnel time or part of the ATR regs that they can get is going to be massively advantageous to them. So, in a way, finishing P3 in the Constructors' Championship, yes, it's worth $20 million less to them than finishing in P2. That extra wind tunnel time is obviously going to be invaluable. And you do feel that with Ferrari's resources compared to and how good they are at using them compared to Mercedes and Red Bull, that extra time is a necessity because they've struggled to get on top of their car compared to Red Bull. They've fallen behind them. They've fallen not necessarily behind Mercedes. I still think when we take everything away, Ferrari is still a much faster car than the Mercedes is. Although over one lap rather than a race, there's a bit of a different story there. But you do feel that Ferrari need more than the other two teams to try and achieve the same level of performance. I don't think you can really argue the contrary, really, on that.
No, I don't think you can. But I want to spin what Courtney said a different way. We talked about the overspend for the budget cap, or if you overspend this much, how much performance can you bring to the car? But how much would you be willing to spend for extra development time? And if you're willing to spend $20 million to have more time in the wind tunnel and in your ATR regulations, is that a worthwhile investment to come third? Be it Mercedes or Ferrari? A different way to think about it. But you're paying for the extra development time.
I mean, you can't...
For a big team, that's...
Yeah. I mean, you literally
they
can't...
They can afford $20 million.
Well, no, that's it, Lee. I mean, you literally can't buy it. I mean, Red Bull tried.
They were spending much.
Yeah. No, that's it. And, I mean, you literally cannot buy that thing because... I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it's just invaluable to the... I'm just trying to think of a right way to rationalise this, but... it's just absolutely madness, really, how you can think about sacrificing... I mean, this is Ferrari, right? Sacrificing P2, their best performance in years, just to try and get a bit of a leg up for next season. They should have already had a leg up for this season, and they obviously squandered that. So it's such a tough call. If I was at Ferrari, if I was Mattia Binotto, I'd be going for P2. Same as Mercedes, really. I just don't think you can justify a hypothetical scenario. I mean, because if it doesn't work, then you've got to answer to the board members and everyone else. Well, you basically wasted $20 million and you've achieved nothing by doing it. That's kind of how they'll look at it.
Yeah. All right.
Adam, can I just follow on with, sorry, Lee, just like one more thing. I'm going to ask you, Adam, as the resident Ferrari fan on this panel, where do Ferrari actually go from here? Because like we had all the talk when Ferrari were struggling, a few years ago, there was this long-term plan, which I was impressed with, this long-term strategy, because Ferrari have always gone with the short-term strategy, appeasing the fan base and always falling short. They went with the long-term strategy, going into 2022, saying, look, this is going to be our year. Be patient with us. It's gone horribly wrong this season. So what do you think the strategy will be from Ferrari, even from a sort of a marketing perspective, selling their project to the fans moving forward?
Well, I mean, I'll kind of answer that quite straightforward, like with an example that happened this weekend. I mean, during qualifying, Ferrari had announced on their social media their hypercar project for the Le Mans series. And that was doing some test runs at Imola. That was all going on at the same time as qualifying when Ferrari were absolutely doing terrible. So, you tell me on that one. What does that really say? You wouldn't make that. I mean, Ferrari wouldn't make that kind of announcement if they were fighting in the championship and trying to bank on a P1 and P2 on the grid for the Mexican Grand Prix. They wouldn't want to take attention away from that. So, I think for Ferrari right now, from a brand perspective, I don't think they're too worried about that. I mean, obviously they want to win. They don't want to come second. They don't want to come P3. The embarrassment's there. But I think it's like Mattia Binotto and Louis Camilleri have been saying, really, with Ferrari. It's a step in the right direction. It's progress. They have made progress. Ultimately, they did start the season well. They've just not been able to carry that on. I think Ferrari this season will look back on where things went wrong, and they will look to try and rectify those for 2023. If we have the same problems in 2023, or worse, Ferrari fall further behind and it's Red Bull versus Mercedes and Ferrari get left in no man's land in P3, looking over their shoulder rather than looking at what's ahead of them, then I think we're going to have those questions answered. And then I think it's going to be a much more difficult, more tumultuous decision Ferrari will have to make. So right now, it seems rather calm. They're obviously disappointed on the inside. I think anyone that is anywhere near close to what's going on at Ferrari will tell you that they're disappointed. But it just seems right now, this is just one of those where they're just going to have to take a little bit more punishment, enjoy the successes that they have had this season, because they have had quite a few, and hopefully next season, with the advantage that they'll have over Red Bull at least, maybe not Mercedes, they might be able to close the gap more and perhaps put together a more sustainable championship challenge next season. So I think that's how they've got to take it. I don't think they've got to rip up the foundations to start again. They were banking on this season to make progress. I know a lot of people were saying, we're going to try and fight for a world championship. They can argue to a degree they did, although albeit for half the season. But I think next year's has to be the one. If they're not in a better position next season and fighting for a world title all the way through the season, then I think the big questions are going to have to be asked, and we'll have to see where we go from there, really. But look, let's move on from Ferrari. I think we need to talk about Alpine and McLaren. And, this was a day that was really, really shaping up to be a good one for Alpine. I mean, going into the weekend, they had the protest overturned on Fernando Alonso's 30-second time penalty. For what it's worth, I thought it was a ridiculous time penalty under the circumstances that they gave to Alonso, because they forgot to put the black and orange flag out for him to bring him into the pits. And because of their mistake, Alonso ended up getting penalised anyway. And it really punished what was an otherwise fantastic recovery from Fernando Alonso to get all the way back to P7 in Austin. The only caveat I would throw to that in defence of the FIA is that if Alonso had to come in the pits anyway to fix the damage on his car, it would have been more than 30 seconds. So if anything, the penalty was actually lighter than what he would have got anyway. That being said, it's still another fumble from the FIA in that regard, and the stewards, all things considered. And it was really strange that the penalty got overturned, not because the decision was wrong or that they made the mistake. It was because Haas's protest, when Haas were the ones that were protesting what happened with Alpine, because Magnussen got the same, got a punishment for a black and orange flag in Singapore, I think it was. And, basically their protest was lodged a lot later than it was allowed. So then the FIA had to correct that as well. So we're just adding to the otherwise shambles that we know and love with the FIA this season. It just seems to be one thing after the other.
Yeah, I think they had submitted late because they were advised that they could submit it late, but then they were told actually they couldn't submit it late, which is one of the reasons why it was overturned. I think one thing we need right now is we need a governing body to govern the FIA, to penalise the FIA when the FIA mess up.
Well, read their own rule book would probably be step one.
That's why you need another governing body to punish the FIA.
Well,
find the FIA.
Yeah, I mean, this was
the troubleshooter.
That's it. I mean, we need that paperclip back, the one that goes on like Microsoft Word 99 or whatever it was. Comments like, there's an FIA ruling here. Would you like some help or something? I don't know. You could protest this result. Let me know how. I don't know, something crazy. But it's such a strange one. Honestly, I honestly don't know where you really go from there. It's just one thing after. You can't make this up. I mean, we had Japan when everyone was confused that Max Verstappen was announced as the world champion, where we thought he didn't have enough points, and it took for Mercedes to verify what Red Bull was saying to Max, because they were looking through the rule books themselves. It's like, does anyone not know what's going on here? It just seems really strange, and people conveying this information like they're just telling people the wrong thing half the time. So anyway, look, we fast forward. Alpine got the result overturned. I think they got the P7 back, which I think was fair under the circumstances. The right decision was done in the end, and this was looking to be a good day for them. Fernando Alonso once again driving impeccably well. He had a great opening stint. It started to fall away from him, obviously, because of the problems that affected him towards the end of the race, and then he had the engine blowout, which was really unfortunate for him. He was really devastated, and it put Alpine in a vulnerable position, because not only did Alonso lose out points, but Ocon ended up being beaten by Daniel Ricciardo, of all people, in McLaren today, despite the penalty he had, who had the strategy nailed on today and took full advantage of it. And now the gap between the two is 7 points. McLaren right back in this race again. It's all to play for, and I don't want to jinx it, but McLaren might have their player too right back in the thick of it when they needed him most.
Yeah, it was a strange one with Daniel Ricciardo today because like even at the beginning of the race, I was actually like urging him on to get the overtake because it's like we know he's got it in him. He's given us so many great moments. The late overtakes and particularly in chaotic races, Daniel's always been there to pounce and get the headline results. I was just like willing him on, and then obviously it went on to happen. I thought the Yuki Tsunoda incident was bizarre. I don't quite know how he thought he was able to get an overtake from that position, but I just think you can't criticise him too much for it. Obviously, AlphaTauri and Yuki Tsunoda fans will be annoyed with him, but from his perspective, everyone's been calling for him to have some fire in his belly, and I just think he had an adrenaline rush. He knew he had much faster tyres, and I just think he got a bit carried away from himself. But apart from that incident, it was great to see Dan Ricciardo, like the way that we've seen with Sebastian Vettel. When you know that a driver's going to retire at the end of the season, you want to see them have some great moments, just a reminder of what these drivers have to offer. And we saw that from Daniel today. Now, let's really hope that he takes this into the last two races and he is in the mix, because Daniel does offer, historically throughout his career, he's offered us a lot of entertaining moments. So I'm hoping he goes out of the sport being the great entertainer that we know that he can be.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I don't want to jump on the bandwagon and give him driver of the day. I just don't feel comfortable of the idea of giving someone driver of the day when they basically took someone out of the race. So whilst I'm very, very impressed by Ricciardo's driving for 99% of the laps in this Grand Prix, I do have to be, fair and say, look, he messed up big time. He tried to go for the move a little bit earlier on, didn't really quite commit to it, and then he tried to make up for it. It was a stupid move on Tsunoda, and it was very unfortunate for Tsunoda that it took him out of the race. I thought the 10-second time penalty was fair under the circumstances, and but he despite that, he recovered it really, really well and made some great overtakes, made the strategy work supremely well, and he's got some big points on the board for McLaren at a time when they really need him. And I think it kind of just brings us back really to this battle with McLaren and Alpine. We all seemed convinced from one point or several times this season it's Alpine's to lose, but McLaren keep hanging in there. They keep chipping away. Alpine look to have them dead and buried. Again today it looked like Alonso and Ocon were going to bring 7th and 8th home, really hammer down that advantage and look in the prime position going into the final few Grand Prix. As it stands, McLaren are right there once again. For some reason, I feel like McLaren are going to steal this at the end of the season. And if they do, Alpine are really going to be kicking themselves because they should be comfortably P4. It's a bit like Force India or Racing Point a few years ago when they should have been P3. And they didn't get it, and McLaren got them there. It feels like McLaren are going to do it again, only this time to Alpine. Lee, what are your thoughts on not only Alpine's, Alpine's misfortunes this weekend, but also Ricciardo's recovery and perhaps a somber, quiet race for Norris, surprisingly?
Well, in qualifying, Daniel and Lando are pretty close together in the performance, which we haven't seen a lot this year in qualifying. And so I wondered how Daniel would do we perform one of his better races, which he has appeared to be. But the old adage of you're only good as your last race. Just obviously it's not last race, we've got another 2 races, and Daniel could be like he has been all season for the next 2 races, and what I'm saying is going to be completely irrelevant. But just imagine if this is now just the return of Daniel 3 races from the end of the season, A, when McLaren need him to pick up and bring those extra points back, and B, to put himself back on the shop window for 24 season. I'm still Daniel. I can still do these overtakes. Give me a seat in 24, guys, and I can deliver. And not, Daniel can't deliver. He can't overtake anymore. He can't do anything. Why do we want him in 24? So I know it's probably a bit early to say, Daniel was back, which it is. But just imagine if he just comes alive with those 2 races more to go, and it's just Daniel just gets McLaren secure that spot, P4. And he puts himself right in the window, and it'd be obviously really happy for Daniel to show that he still has it, even if he doesn't get a seat. Just as a fan going, we still believe Daniel had it and he's got it. But McLaren need him to bring those points, and he's done that today. And a day that Lando drove solidly, but he just obviously didn't deliver the performance that Daniel did today. But Fernando, I just feel sorry for the guy. He just can't get a break this season.
No, he can't. It's crazy that it's. I mean, what was it you sent us, Courtney, in the group chat earlier? Obviously, there was a bit of words being exchanged from Fernando Alonso in the direction of Lewis Hamilton, Sir Lewis Hamilton, I should say, for a bit of shade. Sir Lewis responds on his social media before this weekend with a picture of him and Alonso on the podium with Sir Lewis looking a bit happy being P1, Fernando's P2. And then, of course, you shared a lovely image with us with Lewis in the cool-down room looking at a picture of Fernando Alonso being distraught over his car breaking down and with the caption, karma. And for those...
That's the thing, right? You don't want to encourage it too much, but it does seem like Alonso he just keeps on making indirects about Lewis Hamilton. It's like, mate, get over it. It was 15 years ago. That's where I stand on the whole Alonso thing. Like, come on, like, you're a 40-year-old man. Stop it.
Well, what was it? It was saying it was something along the lines of that Max Verstappen's 2 world championships were more impressive than Lewis's several world championships because Lewis, all he had to do was beat his teammate. I mean, in fairness...
What about Felipe Massa in 2008? I mean, that they were driving different teams as far as I was aware. But
we don't want to open up that one again. Yeah. Too painful. I still wake up in a cold sweat thinking Massa's won the world championship, just like his dad. Like, no. Like, being told it's not happening. No. Or that Ferrari mechanic that punches the wall. Yeah. Sad times. But no, I know what you mean. Like, why do we get these things on social media, like opportunities where drivers throw a little bit of shade or comments that they make in interviews that are taken out the wrong... I don't know. Look, I don't know Fernando. I know there have always been times on occasions where he's had a bit of an axe to grind with Sir Lewis, and I know that whilst they do have that respect for each other, it does feel that perhaps sometimes you don't need to say this or need to say that. Interview quotes can always be thrown at to drive an agenda or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes I just feel that either people just need to get on board with the idea that sometimes these things are going to be said between rivals and this sort of thing will happen, makes the things a little bit spicy. It's not stuff you always want to hear, but we get this in other sports, like Formula One's no different. Or we all just join hands in one big circle and just hug each other and just drive, and that be that, and we don't say anything. I don't know, to be honest. I
completely agree. Look, you want to be seeing... I like it when the drivers say how it is. I think it, particularly like when they're in the cockpit and the adrenaline's rushing, and you hear what they really think on matters that annoy them. So if that's how Fernando feels, absolutely share it. But then people are going to have an opinion on it. So you can't. It works both ways. People do always take it too far. I completely agree. But as I say, absolutely, Fernando can say whatever he wants, but from my perspective, it seems like the man is stuck in 2007. It's done. Life moves on. And I know some people will, Abu Dhabi, that was a year ago. This is 15 years ago. 15 years ago. Alonso's been in race-winning cars since. He's had opportunities to win world championships since, which he didn't take. Let's move on from it, because I'm pretty sure Lewis has.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Lewis has. I mean, and he'll probably go to bed. He'll just look up and see all those world championships sitting in his trophy cabinet and 100 or so Grand Prix victories, to reminisce on if he ever gets bored. He can just pop in one of those tapes if he wanted to. I don't know. I just feel like people take this, as you said, you're right. People do take this way too seriously. But you see these quotes, and every time I open up social media, I see something, someone said something, you're just like, oh God, here we go again. Like, do we really need to? It's every single race now. It's not even. It's not even a season.
That's every day.
Yeah, it's almost every day. It's like, look, what's the lottery? Like, spin. It's like that guy, that 3D art guy, the Spanish fella. Like, spin the wheel, Magic Alonso pops up or something like that. Or whatever. Like, see what happens. It's the same with social media. What fresh hell awaits us today on social media? Just find out. It's like log into Twitter, log into Insta. It's always going to be something. It's just
because after the cost cap thing, is like, oh well, finally we've got the end to the cost cap thing, which rumbled on for weeks, and now it's a new thing. The Ted Kravitz thing over the weekend, the Fernando Alonso thing. It never ends. The F1 circus never stops.
Oh God, yeah. And for people that don't know the context with Ted Kravitz, obviously Red Bull and Max Verstappen were boycotting interviews from Sky F1 because they were they were very annoyed at the fact that Ted Kravitz kept on taking opportunities to, indirectly, I think is probably the fairest way of putting it, to critique Max Verstappen over what was going on with Abu Dhabi and everything else. And he wasn't singling him out in particular. I think he mentioned a quote saying that Max just can't seem to win a normal championship. I don't necessarily think that was a case where... No, it wasn't a dig. I think it was one of those where it was just, no matter... Like, Max is doing what he does. He wins the world championship. He's won it twice now. He's done everything he's needed to do. He's complied by the rules. He's not done anything wrong. He's just done what anyone else would do in the same position if they were as naturally gifted and talented as he was. And there are very few in the sports history that are. But I kind of see, to a degree, as unpopular as this might sound, I do get sometimes why Red Bull in particular might feel a little bit annoyed that every opportunity that not necessarily just Sky, but a few other media outlets as well take opportunities to bash at them. And it's not necessarily Abu Dhabi, obviously the budget cap thing as well. We can say what we want to say about that. The fact of the matter is they overspent. They breached the cap. Technically, they cheated. And, you know, they've been punished for that. And we'll talk about that in the next episode when we do a bit of a news roundup, because I'm aware of time, so I don't want to talk about that as well, because that's a bit of a doozy of an episode as well. I think you'll agree. So I get sometimes where they may feel like no matter what they do, they're being portrayed as the villain in this case, and Max has been targeted for abuse online for no reason. I don't know why, but you know that's how it goes. It goes both ways in the other aspect as well. I mean, I remember the Sky Sports advert where at Christmas, I think it was last year, they showed a clip of the incident between him and Lewis at Silverstone, and it just had Merry Christmas from Sky, and I thought that was a bit distasteful because it was a big crash. And if you'd seen someone like Ziggo Sports in Holland do that, everyone would be going crazy. Everyone would be going mad, saying, oh, they're, you know, this, that, and everything else, or any other media outlet for that matter. So I kind of understand why Red Bull feel annoyed about it. If they want to boycott Sky F1, that's fine. That means we won't see or hear Christian Horner on the pit wall every single race, so there's a plus there. But, you know, but with Max, I don't blame him for feeling the way that he does. I know he's done the same thing with Netflix. If he wants to do that with Sky, that's absolutely fine. I think the guy just wants to get on with driving. And quite frankly, I would love to be in a position where one day we don't keep bringing up Abu Dhabi every 5 minutes or stuff like that. But I can understand why people are still enraged about it. And hearing what they've been hearing this week with a budget cap, it's not going to make them feel any better, quite frankly. So you can understand merits on both sides of the arguments. I just wish everybody would stop trying to throw digs at everyone every 5 minutes over it and just get on with things as best as you can.
Oh yeah, completely agree on that. The one thing I will say about boycotting media is as soon as you boycott the media, you lose control of any narrative. So the fact that Red Bull don't talk or Max won't talk at the moment, to be it Sky or other outlets, but even in Netflix in this scenario, means that their version or their story won't be heard, and then more abuse will be thrown their way because all they're hearing is the other side of the story that to Red Bull, and it boycotting in this sense doesn't actually, in my opinion, solve what Red Bull will agree against. It just make matters worse.
Yeah, no, it's true. All he's going to do is make Sky sweat a little bit more, because now they're going to have to find someone to fill about 3 out of the 4 hours of their program for airtime, for interviews and stuff like that. That's all they're going to have to find. Like, oh crap, Christian's busy now. He's not going to do any interviews. Who else are we going to get? Like, are we on first name business terms with anybody else other than Toto or Matty? You know, like, who's the guy that runs Alfa Romeo? Or is Fred Vasseur? Is he still there? Like, I thought he'd sold up. You know, that I don't know, but
get Gunter on and just get
Exactly.
Get Gunter Steiner on. There you go. That's the person I'd want to hear from for 3 hours. You never hear much from him at the moment now that Haas are where they are right now. And so, yeah, that's probably a way forward. Yeah, put some suggestions in, guys, in the comments. Now that Christian Horner's not going to be doing, as I said, 3 out of the 4 hours of the Sky broadcast, talking to Sky, who would you like to see being interviewed instead? I'm sure there's a plethora of people in that paddock. They only just got to look around and ask, providing they're not wearing a Red Bull top, of course, but we'll see. Let's move on to Alfa Romeo today. And amazing story in qualifying for Alfa Romeo. They seem to be completely lost for the rest of the season. P6 seemed to be really at risk of being lost to Aston Martin. qualifying, Valtteri Bottas was unbelievable. If anyone had said to me that Valtteri Bottas was going to be out qualifying Charles Leclerc in Mexico, I'd have asked, is Valtteri going to put it on pole? As it were, he didn't, but that's still pretty impressive, getting P6 on the grid. The race pace, not so good, fell behind not only Charles Leclerc, but the 2 Alpines and the 2 McLarens as well, finishing P10. Still, though, that's 1 more point than Aston Martin this weekend. With 2 races to go, 4 points does not seem like a big margin, but you never know. Every point is going to count in this battle between those 2 teams. So good for Alfa Romeo to get back in the points, although perhaps they would have hoped for a little bit more this afternoon.
Yeah, I think
really... Sorry,
go on, Courtney.
No, you go. You
can tell we're organised.
After the great qualifying, I think they would have been disappointed that they didn't score more points. Clearly, the upgrades they brought in Austin are working, because that qualifying pace, I don't think it came from nowhere. Obviously, Valtteri did the brilliant drive, but the upgrades have worked to a degree to unlock extra performance at the right time of the season. But 1 point, as you said, is better than no points that Aston Martin got. But I think they would have been aiming to try and at least keep. Obviously, couldn't keep Charles behind, but they could have been. They're probably aiming for best of the rest. So I think they would have been disappointed that they weren't able to hold on to that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, what do you think about this one with Alfa Romeo, guys? Because it's very easy for us to say with a few races to go, oh, maybe they found some pace at the right time and they might carry this on to the rest of the season. But as we've already established with Ferrari, another team that has a similar plight to what they've been having with the engine issues this season, could Mexico just be a one-off, given its unique characteristics of high altitude and being a high downforce circuit, something that Alfa Romeo has often been good. Bottas is usually an absolute genius when it comes to dealing with tracks that have a lot of high traction zones and 90-degree corners. So there is a risk, perhaps, that this opportunity that they needed to get more points has perhaps passed them by, with all due respect.
Possibly, but I think the positive that Alfa Romeo could take from this weekend is that it seems that Valtteri Bottas has broken from his slumber since the summer break. It just seems like it was on one big mental break since the summer. So maybe they'll get a few moments from Valtteri Bottas, because come on, look, he got a lot of stick for his time at Mercedes, but he's still a very, very good driver. And on his day, he can get the performance for the team. So who knows? You know, we're talking about Dan Ricciardo waking up again. Maybe we might see a couple more surprise results from Valtteri Bottas in the last 2 races.
Maybe.
Zhou Guanyu, bit unfortunate today. Just, you know, it was there or thereabouts, but he just couldn't quite make it up towards the end. His pace really just not quite there with Bottas this weekend, P13. But, you know, I think he recovered some good places and qualified from a sort of less than impressive qualifying. Aston Martin, now, they're going to be a bit disappointed today, because qualifying, they weren't great. And that was a bit of a surprise, because it did seem to improve their performance a lot in qualifying in recent weeks. In the race, they did take a gamble with Sebastian Vettel. It didn't pay off on strategy. He sort of ran out of pace towards the end of the Grand Prix, despite the fact that he went soft mediums. It did seem to work. He went very, very long into the race. His pace was incredibly good on the soft tyres. I think he did 38 laps on the softs, and he was P11 when he pitted. Did seem that he was going to be quite handy towards the end of the race. For whatever reason, just couldn't make those mediums work, and he fell down the pecking order. Lance Stroll, finishing P15, mind you, so not too bad, but his race was pretty much ruined after that altercation with Pierre Gasly, which he had to get out of the way to avoid a crash there, but wrecked his tyres in the opening stint and was pretty much on his own for the remainder of the Grand Prix. So they've lost a little bit of ground to Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin. This run that they've been on to slow down a little bit. I suppose the saving grace for them this weekend is it's only 1 point, and that they can still make that back in the final few races.
Yeah, I mean, you'd expect them to. They've been on a roll lately, and I was shocked just to see them fall back the way they did. Maybe again, it might be the altitude. I think you just have to be careful with Mexico, because it does seem to be the type of circuit, because of the altitude, that throws up surprise results. It's not like, you know, circuits like Silverstone, where that's the type of circuit which gives you like an overall picture of the raw pace of the cars. You look at Silverstone as a reference of like where you expect the cars to be throughout the season. Whereas like tracks like Monaco to an extent and Mexico as well, you've got to kind of put them off as one-off races. So I don't think Aston Martin would be too alarmed. And you're right, Adam, they only kind of lost 1 point from it. So we'll see where they are in Brazil, but I expect them to be back where they have been previously.
What about you, Lee? How did you see Aston Martin today? Would you think they'll be worried going into the final few races about today, or do you think they'll just shake that one off and look towards their more regular form of late?
I agree with Courtney. I don't think they'll be too concerned as a one-off. I think prior to this season, as Courtney said in the podcast, that Mercedes previously had struggled in their years of dominating in the sport at Mexico. Although Aston Martin, right off of the back, then Mercedes would be when Mercedes struggled. It just reminded me a lot of the issues Mercedes used to have at Mexico, where obviously this year Mercedes is like, oh yeah, we're really good this year at Mexico. This is a surprise. But Aston Martin just falling back, just as the obviously one-off, as Courtney said, in Monaco, you have Monza, just that kind of circuit that you treat as a one-off. And I think with the sprint race and the two Grand Prix left, they'd be quite confident they can grab those extra points that they need to overhaul Alfa Romeo. If they left Brazil, obviously we get to that, the preview in the coming weeks when we get closer to that. If they left Brazil with 0 points, then I think they'll be concerned. But right now, I don't think they'll be concerned at the moment.
No, that's fair enough. Let's talk about AlphaTauri now. AlphaTauri were quite adventurous today. They did seem to have some good pace. Yuki Tsunoda, very unfortunate to be have his race ended by Daniel Ricciardo. Could have been on for points. Pierre Gasly was definitely in the fight today, ultimately just coming up short in P11. At this point of the season, again, every point counts, and they're still only a point behind Haas. They need to get at least 2, because, of course, Kevin Magnussen's, what was it, his P5 or P4 in the first race of the season at Bahrain. That ultimately has gives them the advantage if they're on level points with AlphaTauri. So they need at least 2 points. Their pace does seem to be going up, where Haas right now seem to need a miracle to get anywhere near the points, let alone score one. So for AlphaTauri, first of all, what did you make of their day? Was there anything in particular that sort of stood out for you with them? And towards the rest of the season, can they overhaul Haas for P8? It literally feels like a P9 away from perhaps pulling that off.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Haas, looking at AlphaTauri, it's kind of like I don't know, think like a game of bowling where you do your last bowl and you're neck and neck with somebody and you're just waiting for them to do the last frame, like please fail, please fail, please fail, because obviously it's out of your control, isn't it? But I don't think Haas can score any more points where they're at. So they'll be hoping that AlphaTauri mess up. You'd think with Pierre Gasly in particular, he might be able to get that one result for them. You know, they're obviously for 2, when you count the sprint race, 3 opportunities for them to do it. So it's gonna be a close one. But it just comes to show how far Haas have fallen back. But we expected them to fall back like that. So I'm more surprised about how much AlphaTauri have fallen back, because obviously through association, when Red Bull do well, you expect AlphaTauri to do well, and it seems like they've gone in different directions. So I don't quite know what's happened with them this season.
Yeah, it just feels like when we're going to be looking back on the 2022 season, and we sort of pick apart, what was good and what was bad about it, you have to go some way to find something a bit more disappointing this season than Haas's fall from grace. I mean, this is a team that ultimately can't spend that much money. They've probably spent more money on repairing the car than they have developing it. And I think, that's not even trying to make a joke. That's probably a fact as well. And, as a result of that, their chances for progression were always going to be limited to what they did early on in the season. Now, they did maximise some opportunities, but they did squander others. And as this season draws to a close, we were talking about a team that was fighting in the mid-table most of the season and thinking, maybe they might finish P5 or P6 like they did a few years ago. Now you almost feel like it's going to be a celebration for them if they don't finish second last ahead of Williams, who are in their own little league right now. But you feel that Williams probably have an upwards trajectory that's higher than Haas's right now, because there just seems to be some level of ambition there from those that run the team. And as a result, I just can't help but feel that it's just really disappointing. I don't feel that. I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. I don't feel that I look at any team on the grid right now and think that they do not have a desire to try and win in Formula One, except for Haas.
Yeah.
They're the only one that I feel right now. I know people can make an argument for AlphaTauri because they're always going to want to be the second fiddle to Red Bull, and I understand that, but I do see some level of ambition to try and get a one-up on them every now and then. Even if it's like going different on the car concept, they could have easily followed what Red Bull did and produced a solid mid-table car, which perhaps with hindsight they probably should have done. But they do try to do a few things different, have their own identity. With Haas, on the other hand, I can't make a case for Haas really being interested in Formula One other than just trying to show the brand and just running a race and saying, oh yeah, we look good on TV. We're one of the top teams in world motorsport. And it's like, well, for me, I just don't see the point. The only reason why I'm happy that Haas are in Formula One right now, and I apologise to any Haas fans for saying this, but I'm just going to be honest, the only reason why I'm happy to see him there is because I know we're going to be left with 9 cars on the grid if they're not. Really, that's the only reason why I'm happy they're there, because nobody's going to be able to replace them.
Yeah, you have a look at like with teams like Audi coming in. You know that when Audi come in, they're going to look, as you said, Adam, like the other teams in the sport, they're going to look to win. And you're right, you want to see teams come in and make a contribution. It's also not fair on the drivers that come in because it's an opportunity for them to showcase what they have to offer. So the Mick Schumacher's, being responsible for his downfall to an extent with the crashes, but he's not going to get the opportunities to prove himself and highlight his ability to like other people watching him because of the struggles of the car. So they do owe it to the drivers as well to have a bit more ambition.
Yeah, I think so too. And it doesn't really, I don't think it really matters who you put in their car. This is why I kind of feel like I'm leaning towards Hülkenberg being the choice for Haas, because they just want a driver that is going to look okay and is going to finish races rather than someone that might be quick, but he also might end up putting in a barrier. To Mick Schumacher's credit, he did neither of those this weekend and finished ahead of his teammate. So, you always got to look for positives somewhere. I just don't think there's really a case to be argued one way or the other that I'm expecting much from Haas. I think we've had their peak moment in 2022. I can't really see it getting any better for them until 2026, assuming they're still going to be in the sport in 2026. So, I don't know. I'm sorry. I want to be more positive and optimistic about these things because I do like a plucky underdog, but I just can't get behind a team like Haas because there's no desire there. They're just the only reason why I think the only reason why they're still in Formula One right now is because of the budget cap. I think the budget cap didn't exist and everyone else, well, not so much everyone else, but other teams were spending ridiculous amounts of money and weren't being limited on what they could spend. Then I don't think they'd want to stick around anymore for that in the current economic climate there. So make of that what you will. I want to move on to something a little bit more positive. I want to talk about Williams because I like what Williams are trying to do. Latifi, we only saw Latifi, I think, once in that entire race from memory, and I think that was when he was allowing his teammate to lap him. So, yeah. Only driver that was 2 laps down at the end of the day, Nicholas Latifi. So, I don't know what happened to him, though, because I remember following the timesheets. He must have had a moment somewhere because he wasn't too far behind the Haases and all of a sudden he finds himself a lap down on the pair of them. So very, very strange one for him today. But again, he's just running out the clock on his F1 career and good luck to him in his future. That's all you can say. Alex Albon, on the other hand, again, I think all things considered, if we're looking at try and establish a baseline performance to that Williams, Albon once again is exceeding expectations. No points this weekend, but a solid P12 from him, almost getting it out of Q1 in qualifying. He was right in the thick of it again. It was great to see.
Yeah, but again, it's just Alex Albon. It's the Alex Albon redemption arc. We've been very vocal about, there's been a lot said about Red Bull, and I think one of the reasons why I've been overly critical of Red Bull is because of the way that we see Gasly and Albon being treated. Again, that's just my opinion. And we've seen Gasly rejuvenate himself. Obviously, going on to Alpine, he'll be able to establish himself once again. And we've seen the same with Albon. He's been given that chance. He's doing a fantastic job with one of the poorest teams in the sport. And I'm genuinely happy for the guy because just like Gasly, he seemed like a beaten man at the end of his his time at Red Bull.
Yeah. Lee, I'm going to give you the final thoughts on this one with Williams. We've obviously been saying with Williams this season that one of their biggest problems is the fact that they've not got two capable drivers in there doing the business for them. In fairness to Latifi, not to single him out because he seems like a very nice guy and a capable driver anyway, but even if Williams had Hamilton and Verstappen in their car, hypothetically, they're probably still going to be coming P10 in the Constructors' Championship. So I guess my question is, with the news going around that Logan Sargent looks the likely candidate for that Williams seat next year, is he going to be able to bring better fortunes to the team from a driver perspective?
Well, based on Logan's performance in Formula 2, he does have some talent. Obviously, older drivers to be in Formula 2 have some talent. I don't mean to take anything away from other drivers, but he's got the eagerness to obviously deliver and obviously he gets super license points, deliver and obviously not crash, because I think that's very important. But as proven with Mick Schumacher, that could be an undoing. But he's going to bring hopefully the more reliability and a faster pace that unfortunately Nicholas Latifi hasn't been able to deliver in the Williams. But as you said about other teams having the desire to win, Williams' new owners have made it very clear that they want to win. They're willing to invest to win. And the car has been slowly picking up in performance over the year. Yes, it's still the slowest, but you can see they've improved throughout the year. And having two drivers that hopefully, well, we know one in Alex can already deliver, but having two that can hopefully deliver means that hopefully Williams will have a more promising year next year and being more in the fight with the midfield and not being so detached points-wise in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah,
and obviously
that's what it's all about. Yeah.
There's the rumours going around that they're talking to Porsche as well. Don't know if that's true, but if that is, then that's obviously a very good seat for Logan to try and get himself into.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this business with Porsche, because ultimately what fell through between them and Red Bull was the fact that Porsche wanted eventually to have total control, and Red Bull were not going to allow that. And I can understand that. I'm not sure, whilst it seems more likely that could happen at Williams, would Williams or Doralton Capital in this case want to concede total control to Porsche for the same reason? Perhaps it's more likely. I just don't really know what benefit they're going to get out of this partnership with Porsche before it turns into the Porsche team rather than Williams. And, make of that what you will, guys, but I just feel like it's going to be one of those where we're going to see, if it does happen, that eventually one of the most famous names in Formula One and in motorsport is going to find itself put down to the history books and the records because it's now become Porsche.
Yeah, it would be a shame if that does happen, obviously losing the name of Williams from the sport. It's only obviously a rumour, it may not happen at all. But with Doralton Capital being an investment company, obviously their main purpose is to make money, and if selling it to Porsche makes them money, that's obviously fulfilled their business objective. It depends if they're in it for the long term to make money through the franchising of the teams in the sport, which is obviously what Formula One as I've forgotten the name, Form One I've forgotten the name of the company that owns Formula One.
Well, Formula One Management.
Yeah, the Formula One Management, but the
Liberty Media.
Liberty Media.
There we go.
That's the one I was struggling with.
We're all tired.
It's late on a Sunday night. Yeah.
Liberty Media obviously wants to franchise out the teams and the teams to be sustainable and their brands as in a team, like in the Americans sports, that they obviously Liberty Media are trying to heavily push Formula One too, like in that the whole franchising of the sport. So it depends if Doralton are for long term, and obviously the money that could bring back. But it would be a shame to lose the name of Williams. I know I've gone off on a tangent on that.
Yeah, tell him to buy Haas.
I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, do that. Tell him to buy Haas.
Problem solved.
Like people go, because people think, Liberty Media aren't going to be happy if they buy an American team. They're based in Switzerland. I don't know where they get off this idea about thinking, they're based in the US. They have a base in the US, but that's more like a franchise program for all of their motorsport outlets in NASCAR and other things like that, for example, not necessarily Formula One. That's just the sort of thing they show on the video. If they want to go to the factory, they go to Switzerland. That's where everything is. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know. But yeah, it's just one of those, really. I can't wait to see Porsche, what they do in Formula One, but I'd rather them just bring their own team, but they ain't going to do that. It costs way too much money. Guys, look, late on a Sunday night, I think we're going to wrap this one up here. I can only apologise again for the lack of, well, not the lack thereof, but the issues in quality of this podcast, some technical issues that we've been having of late for a little while. We're trying to get on top of those, so I can only apologise for that at the moment. So please do stick with us in the meantime. We're hoping to get that sorted very, very soon. But if you have followed us all the way to the end of the show, thank you so much for tuning in. You can support us, as always, if you're new to the show, by clicking the subscribe button and the like button if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're following us on your favourite podcasting platform, you can support us by giving us a 5-star review. Let us know if you've done that. We'll give you a shout out on the next episode as a reward for your ongoing support and patronage to the DNF1 F1 podcast. But until next time, guys, please stay safe. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back later this week for another episode where we're going to do another news roundup, our final news roundup for the end of the season. We're going to be talking about current driver contracts, current circuit dilemmas going on right now for some prospective races coming on the calendar. We're going to be talking about the cost cap breach news from Red Bull and Aston Martin and get some reaction on that, and some other news stories doing the rounds as well. So definitely check that one out, coming out later in the week. But until next time, guys, thanks for tuning in. Please stay safe, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.